Don't you think men really like intelligence more when it comes right down to it?
Please. Are we going to go back to that? Are you kidding?
Sure. I mean, a brain, a caring...
Picture this. It's a quiet Tuesday night in 1986. Millions of Americans are settling in to watch The Tonight Show, expecting their usual dose of laughs and celebrity chat. But what they don't know is that behind the scenes, one of television's most bitter betrayals is about to explode. A friendship that lasted 20 years is about to die in a single phone call. And Johnny Carson, the king of late-night TV, is about to show a side of himself that would shock the world. You see, we all remember Johnny Carson as a smooth-talking host with the perfect timing and that famous smile. For 30 years, he ruled late-night television like no one before or since. But here's what most people don't know. Behind that charming personality was a man who could hold grudges like nobody's business. A man who wasn't afraid to go to war, whether it was with celebrities, newspaper reporters, or even his own family. Today, we're going to dive deep into the most explosive arguments and bitter feuds that Johnny Carson ever had. These aren't just silly celebrity spats. These are stories of betrayal, heartbreak, and raw human emotion that played out on one of America's biggest stages. Some of these fights were so intense that they destroyed friendships forever. Others were so personal that they left scars that never healed. So buckle up, because you're about to discover the fiery side of Johnny Carson that audiences rarely got to see. Trust me, after hearing these stories, you'll never look at The Tonight Show the same way again. Let's start with a story that broke Johnny Carson's heart and changed late-night television forever. It's the tale of Joan Rivers, the woman Carson discovered and mentored, and how their friendship ended in the most brutal way possible. Joan Rivers wasn't always a household name. Back in the early days, she was just another struggling comedian trying to make it in a man's world. But Johnny Carson saw something special in her. He gave her a chance when nobody else would. He let her guest host The Tonight Show more than any other comedian. People started calling her Carson's chosen successor. For 20 years, she was like family to him. But then came 1986, and everything changed overnight. Fox Television offered Joan her own late-night talk show. It was huge news because she would become the first woman ever to host a late-night show on a major network. You'd think Carson would be proud, right? After all, he'd helped make her career possible. Wrong. Dead wrong. The problem wasn't that Joan took the job. The problem was how she did it. You see, the television business moves fast, and Fox warned Joan that news of her show would leak within hours. She had to make a choice. Call Johnny first and risk the story getting out, or keep quiet and tell him later. She chose to keep quiet. When Johnny found out about Joan's new show from a newspaper instead of from her directly, he felt betrayed. Not just professionally betrayed, but personally betrayed. Here was a woman he'd treated like a daughter, and she couldn't even pick up the phone to tell him she was leaving. What happened next was swift and brutal. Joan tried to call Johnny to explain. She wanted to tell him her side of the story, to make him understand why she'd made that choice. But when she called, Johnny picked up the phone, listened to her voice, and then slammed it down without saying a word. That was it. After 20 years of friendship, 20 years of professional partnership, 20 years of shared laughter and success, Johnny Carson never spoke to Joan Rivers again. Not once. Not ever. But it gets worse. Carson didn't just end their friendship. He made sure Joan Rivers was banned from The Tonight Show for the next 26 years. Even after Carson retired and Jay Leno took over, Joan was still not welcome. It wasn't until Jimmy Fallon became host in 2014 that she was finally allowed back on the show. Can you imagine carrying that kind of pain for 26 years? Joan Rivers later said that losing Johnny's friendship hurt her more than any bad review or professional setback she'd ever experienced. She didn't just lose a mentor. She lost a father figure, someone she truly admired and respected. And Johnny? Well, his reputation as a gracious host took a serious hit. People started to see him as cold and unforgiving. But Carson never apologized, never backed down, and never explained his side of the story. In his mind, loyalty was everything, and Joan had broken that trust. The saddest part of this whole story is that by the time Joan Rivers was finally welcomed back to The Tonight Show, it was too late for a real reconciliation. She and Johnny never got the chance to sit down and work things out. When she returned to the show, she talked about how much Carson had meant to her career and her life. But Johnny Carson had been gone for years, and some wounds just can't be healed. Now, not all of Johnny's fights were as heartbreaking as the Joan River situation. Sometimes his confrontations were absolutely hilarious, even when they started from a place of genuine anger. And nobody knows this better than Don Rickles, the master of insult comedy, who once made a mistake of breaking Johnny's favorite possession. Don Rickles and Johnny Carson had been friends for years. They had the kind of friendship built on constant teasing and playful insults. Rickles would come on the Tonight Show and roast Johnny to his face, and Johnny would laugh along and give it right back. It was all in good fun until the night Rickles went too far. It happened in 1976. Rickles was filming his sitcom on the stage right next to the Tonight Show at NBC Studios. One evening, while guest hosting for Johnny, Rickles wandered over to Carson's desk and started fooling around with the props. There was a small wooden cigarette box that Johnny kept on his desk every single night. It wasn't worth much money, but it meant a lot to Carson. Well, Rickles picked up that box and somehow managed to break the lid clean off. When Johnny came back the next day and saw his broken box, he was not happy. He demanded to know who had done it. And when the crew told him it was Rickles, Carson's eyes lit up with mischievous revenge. Here was his chance to get back at the king of insults, and he was to do it in the most public way possible. Without any warning, while the cameras were rolling live, Johnny Carson walked off the Tonight Show stage and marched straight into the middle of Rickles' sitcom filming. Picture the scene. Don Rickles is in the middle of shooting a scene with his co-stars. The audience is watching quietly. And suddenly Johnny Carson burst through the door holding the broken cigarette box like evidence in a murder trial. The look on Rickles' face was priceless. Pure terror mixed with complete disbelief. Here he was, trying to film his TV show, and suddenly the most powerful man in late-night television was standing in front of him, demanding answers. "You broke my box, didn't you, Don?" Carson said in that deadpan voice that made him famous. The audience exploded with laughter. But Rickles knew he was in trouble. What followed was comedy gold. Rickles tried to make jokes, tried to deflect, tried to throw himself on Johnny's mercy. But Carson wasn't letting him off the hook. He grilled him like a prosecutor, making Rickles squirm and stutter in front of everyone. It was brilliant television because it wasn't scripted, it wasn't rehearsed, and it wasn't fake. This was Johnny Carson using real annoyance to create genuine comedy. The beautiful thing about this confrontation was that you could see the affection underneath the anger. Yes, Johnny was genuinely irritated that his box got broken, but he also loved Rickles like a brother, and this was his way of getting revenge without really hurting anyone. It was Carson at his absolute best, turning a moment of frustration into late-night television history. To this day, that clip is considered one of the greatest Tonight Show moments ever recorded. It showed Johnny's quick thinking, his perfect timing, and his ability to blur the line between reality and entertainment. The broken box became a small price to pay for a moment that people are still talking about decades later. But while Carson's showdown with Rickles was wrapped in humor and friendship, not all his confrontations ended with laughter. Some were deadly serious, and some involved threats that made even Johnny Carson think twice about his jokes. Wayne Newton was one of the biggest stars in Las Vegas during the 1970s and 1980s. They called him Mr. Las Vegas because of his incredible popularity and his glamorous stage shows. But Johnny Carson saw Wayne Newton very differently. To Carson, Newton was the perfect target for jokes about masculinity, appearance, and show business success. Night after night, Carson would work Wayne Newton into his monologue. He'd make jokes about Newton's high voice, his flashy outfits, and his over-the-top stage persona. Carson once joked that Newton wore more makeup than the famous Rockets dancers. Another time, he suggested that Newton was more interested in his appearance than his music. For a while, Wayne Newton just took it. That's what celebrities did back then. If Johnny Carson made fun of you, you smiled and pretended it was all in good fun. But Carson kept pushing, and eventually he pushed too far. The final straw came when Carson made a joke about Newton losing a big casino deal in Las Vegas. But this wasn't just a joke about business. Carson hinted that Newton's problems might be connected to organized crime, to the mob connections that were rumored to exist in Las Vegas at that time. That was it. Wayne Newton had had enough. This wasn't comedy anymore. This was an attack on his character and his reputation. So Newton did something that shocked everyone in Hollywood. He marched into NBC studios and demanded a face-to-face meeting with Johnny Carson. According to people who were there, it wasn't a friendly conversation. It was a showdown. Newton was furious, and he made it clear that if the jokes didn't stop immediately, there would be serious consequences. He wasn't laughing, he wasn't joking, and he wasn't backing down. Some people who heard about the meeting said Newton's message was simple: keep my name out of your mouth, or else. Johnny Carson, who was used to celebrities either ignoring his jokes or laughing them off, was completely caught off guard. Here was someone actually standing up to him, actually threatening him, actually willing to fight back. And you know what? It worked. Almost overnight, Wayne Newton's name disappeared from Carson's monologue. The joke stopped completely. For a host who prided himself on being able to joke about anyone and anything, Carson's retreat was remarkable. It showed that even the king of late-night television had limits, and Wayne Newton had found them. Unlike some of Carson's other feuds, Newton never talked to media about what happened in that meeting. He didn't write books about it, didn't give interviews about it, didn't try to capitalize on the drama. He simply drew a line in the sand, made sure Carson understood where that line was, and moved on with his life. The encounter remains one of the few times in Johnny Carson's career where someone confronted him directly about his humor and actually got results. It wasn't funny, it wasn't entertaining, but it was effective, and it showed that Carson's words, when they cut too deep, could provoke serious consequences. While Wayne Newton fought back with threats and confrontation, another actor chose a different approach when Carson's jokes became too hurtful to bear. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't a loud argument. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to just walk away. Raymond Burr was one of television's most respected actors. He was best known for playing the brilliant lawyer Perry Mason and the tough detective Robert Ironside. With his deep voice, commanding presence, and impressive acting skills, Burr was exactly the kind of distinguished guest that The Tonight Show loved to feature. But over time, something changed. Johnny Carson started using Raymond Burr as a frequent target in his monologue, but not because of his acting. Carson kept making jokes about Burr's weight. Night after night, Carson would toss Burr's name into jokes about overeating, about being lazy, about being slow and clumsy. At first, Raymond Burr tried to handle it like a professional. He appeared on The Tonight Show a couple of times, smiled politely when Carson made weight jokes during the interviews, and tried to focus on promoting his work. But privately, the jokes were hurting him deeply. According to people who work with Burr, he quietly asked The Tonight Show producers if they could please ask Carson to ease up on the fat jokes. It wasn't that Burr couldn't take criticism. It was that the constant ridicule was humiliating and hurtful. But somehow, that message never seemed to reach Carson, or if it did, he chose to ignore it. After Burr's second appearance on the show in 1976, something changed. Instead of fighting back publicly or making a big scene, Raymond Burr made a simple decision. He would never appear on The Tonight Show again. When producers called to invite him back, he politely declined. When they offered him better time slots or special treatment, he still said no. This wasn't a dramatic walkout or a screaming match. There were no headlines, no gossip column stories, no public statements. Raymond Burr just quietly withdrew from Johnny Carson's world, and his absence spoke louder than any angry words could have. Carson never publicly addressed why Raymond Burr stopped appearing on the show. Burr, for his part, was too much of a gentleman to trash Carson in interviews. But everyone in Hollywood got the message. There was a line between humor and humiliation, and Carson had crossed it. What makes this feud so powerful, despite the lack of fireworks, is how it reflected Carson's blind spots as a comedian and as a person. Carson often assumed that if the audience laughed, then the joke was okay. He thought that celebrities should be able to take whatever he dished out, because that was part of being famous. But Raymond Burr's quiet protest proved him wrong. It showed that words have power, that jokes can cause real pain, and that sometimes the most dignified response to a bully is simply to refuse to participate in their game. In the world of late-night television, Silence could be louder than shouting. And Raymond Burr's silent rejection of Johnny Carson's humor remains one of the most powerful statements about the responsibility that comes with having a platform and a microphone. While some of Carson's feuds were with fellow entertainers, others involved the press. And when the New York Times published something that Johnny didn't like, he decided to use his biggest weapon, his nightly monologue. In 1980, the New York Times ran an article claiming that Johnny Carson was earning $25 million a year, making him the highest-paid television performer in history at that time. Now, you might think that most celebrities would either ignore a story like that or maybe issue a quiet correction through their publicist. But Johnny Carson wasn't most celebrities. The night after the article was published, viewers tuned into The Tonight Show expecting the usual jokes and celebrity interviews. Instead, they got something they'd never seen before. Johnny Carson, visibly angry, standing behind his desk with a copy of the New York Times in his hand, ready for battle. Carson's monologue that night wasn't filled with his usual topical humor and gentle celebrity ribbing. Instead, it was a direct, point-by-point attack on the newspaper's reporting. He called the article completely unfair, accused the paper of printing false numbers, and expressed genuine frustration about what he saw as an invasion of his privacy. What made the moment so startling was seeing Carson drop his usual cool, controlled demeanor. His voice was sharp, his jokes were bitter, his mood was darker than anyone had ever seen on television. For the first time, the audience was seeing Johnny Carson not as the witty showman, but as an angry man defending his reputation against what he felt was sloppy journalism. The reaction was immediate and intense. Other media outlets picked up the story of Carson's on-air attack. Some people supported him, saying that celebrities deserve privacy about their finances. Others criticized him, arguing that someone who made jokes about everyone else should be able to take some scrutiny in return. But for Carson, this wasn't just about money or privacy. He felt that the article made him look greedy and out of touch, especially during a time when many Americans were struggling with inflation and economic problems. Carson had spent decades carefully building an image as a down-to-earth, Midwestern everyman. The suggestion that he was making outrageous amounts of money threatened to destroy that carefully crafted persona. The New York Times stood by its reporting, and the feud eventually faded from the headlines. But the incident revealed something important about Johnny Carson's character. For all his success and confidence, he was deeply sensitive about how he was perceived by the public. And when he felt that perception was under attack, he wasn't afraid to fight back with everything he had. This wasn't just Carson losing his temper. This was Carson declaring war on one of America's most respected newspapers. And while the battle didn't last for years like some of his other feuds, it showed that even the king of late-night television had vulnerabilities and insecurities that could be triggered by the right kind of criticism. If Carson's fight with the New York Times revealed his sensitivity to public perception, his most painful and personal conflict happened far from the cameras, at what should have been one of the happiest moments of his career. In 1987, NBC threw a massive celebration to honor Johnny Carson's 25th anniversary as host of The Tonight Show. The party was filled with celebrities, NBC executives, and everyone who had been part of Carson's incredible success story. It should have been a night of pure joy and celebration. Instead, it became the setting for one of the most heartbreaking confrontations in Carson's life. The person who ruined the evening wasn't a rival comedian or a difficult celebrity. It was his own son. Johnny Carson's relationship with his 3 sons had always been complicated. His dedication to The Tonight Show meant he was often absent during their childhood. His private nature made it difficult for him to connect emotionally with his family, and his struggles with alcohol had created tension and resentment that lasted for years. Rick Carson, Johnny's middle son, had been trying to build a relationship with his famous father for most of his adult life. So when Rick showed up at the anniversary party, emotions were already running high on both sides. What exactly happened that night remained somewhat unclear, because Johnny Carson was a master at keeping his private life out of the public eye. But according to multiple witnesses, what started as a quiet, tense conversation between father and son quickly escalated into something much more serious. Some people who were there said that Rick accused his father of caring more about his career than his family. Others reported that Johnny got angry at Rick for bringing up old grievances during what was supposed to be a celebration. Whatever triggered it, the argument quickly got out of control. The confrontation reportedly happened right there in front of NBC executives, show producers, and celebrity guests. What began as harsh words escalated to shouting, with both Carson and his son refusing to back down. Some witnesses even claimed that things almost turned physical before other people stepped in to separate them. The sight of Johnny Carson, the master of cool composure, losing control in front of all those important people was shocking to everyone who witnessed it. Carson was said to be visibly shaken by the encounter, and he left his own anniversary party early. Unlike his professional feuds, there was no punchline here. No cameras captured the moment, no audience laughed at the drama, and no one could pretend it was all part of the show. This was raw, painful family dysfunction playing out at what should have been a moment of triumph. Carson never spoke publicly about what happened that night, and his relationship with Rick remained distant for the rest of his life. Tragically, Rick Carson died in a car accident in 1991, just 4 years after the anniversary party incident. The two men never got the chance to reconcile. This heartbreaking episode offered a rare glimpse into the real Johnny Carson, the man behind the famous smile and perfect timing. For all his professional success and public adoration, Carson struggled with the same family problems that affect people everywhere. The difference was that his struggles sometimes played out on very public stages. The clash with his son wasn't just intense, it was devastating. And it remains one of the most humanizing and tragic chapters in the story of late-night television's most legendary figure. While Carson's fight with his son exposed deep personal pain, not all of his confrontations came from such an emotional place. Sometimes, the drama happened simply because Johnny's sharp tongue finally pushed someone too far, and they decided to push back in the most dramatic way possible. Jacqueline Susan was a best-selling author in the 1960s, famous for her scandalous novel Valley of the Dolls. Though critics often dismissed her work as trashy, readers couldn't get enough of her books. She was glamorous, successful, and fiercely proud of her achievements. So when she appeared as a guest on Tonight Show, she expected to be treated with respect. She didn't get it. From the moment Carson introduced her, it was clear that he didn't take her seriously as a writer. He made snide comments about her book being a guilty pleasure and joked that her work was just sensationalism in print. The audience laughed, but Susan could hear the condescension in every word. Still, she kept her composure during the interview. She answered Carson's questions with grace, even managed to poke fun at herself a few times, and tried to stay professional despite his obvious dismissiveness. But then Carson made a comment that crossed a line. The exact words vary depending on who tells the story, but everyone agrees that Carson made a cruel remark about Suzanne's appearance. Some say he compared her to a truck driver. Others report that he questioned how such a frivolous woman could write best-selling books. Whatever he said exactly, it was meant to humiliate her on national television. Suzanne handled it in the moment. She didn't storm off the set, didn't start screaming, didn't make a scene. She finished the interview like the professional she was, smiled for the cameras, and waited for the show to end. But once the camera stopped rolling and the audience went home, Jacqueline Susan decided it was time for Johnny Carson to learn a lesson about treating people with respect. At the post-show party, with a Black Russian cocktail in her hand, Susan walked up to Carson, looked him straight in the eye, and threw the entire drink right in his face. The vodka and coffee liqueur dripped down Carson's cheeks as the room fell completely silent. Carson, soaked and stunned, didn't say a word. Suzanne simply turned around and walked away, her head held high and her point made perfectly clear. Word of the cocktail incident spread through Hollywood like wildfire. Gossip columnists had a field day with the story, and everyone in the entertainment business was talking about the woman who had actually stood up to Johnny Carson in such a dramatic fashion. Carson never publicly addressed what happened, but it's widely believed that Jacqueline Susan was quietly blacklisted from the Tonight Show after that night. She would never be invited back, and her name would never be mentioned favorably on the show again. But Susan didn't seem to care about the consequences. In a world where male hosts often dismissed or diminished strong women with a smirk and a joke, she had chosen not to laugh along. She had hit back in the most theatrical and unforgettable way possible. The cocktail toss became the stuff of television legend, one of the rare times that Johnny Carson's cool collective persona was literally shattered by someone who refused to be his punchline. And in that moment of vodka and righteous anger, late-night television got a powerful reminder that words have consequences, and sometimes those consequences come with ice cubes. Jacqueline Suzanne's dramatic response showed that Carson's jokes could provoke real retaliation when they went too far. But perhaps no controversy damaged the Tonight Show's reputation more than the backlash from a joke about a rising star who would later become a cultural icon. In 1984, Vanessa Williams made history as the first African-American woman to be crowned Miss America. Her victory was a groundbreaking moment for diversity and representation in a pageant that had long been criticized for its narrow standards of beauty. It was a moment that should have been celebrated by everyone, including late-night television hosts. But when Vanessa Williams appeared on The Tonight Show shortly after her historic win, Johnny Carson delivered a joke that many people found deeply offensive and hurtful. Carson made a comment about the pageant's history of change, implying that Williams' victory was some kind of gimmick or token gesture rather than a well-deserved achievement. The joke was intended to be playful, but it came across as dismissive and racially insensitive. While some audience members laughed nervously, the backlash was swift and fierce. Vanessa Williams herself later expressed deep disappointment and hurt over Carson's remark. She said it diminished the significance of her achievement and ignored all the hard work she had put into breaking down barriers for other women of color. The joke sparked wider conversations about race, representation, and the responsibilities that came with having such a powerful platform. Carson's response to the controversy was mixed. Privately, according to some reports, he acknowledged that the joke had gone too far and had caused unintended pain. But publicly, he remained mostly silent, letting the controversy simmer without offering a clear apology or explanation. Critics argued that the joke reflected broader cultural blind spots in the entertainment industry at that time. They pointed out how progress was often met with skepticism and dismissiveness rather than celebration and support. Supporters of Carson contended that his humor was simply reflecting the attitudes of the era, not expressing personal malice or prejudice. Regardless of Carson's intentions, the Vanessa Williams controversy remains a significant moment in late-night television history. It showed that even the most beloved and respected figures were not immune to criticism when their words caused real harm. It demonstrated that a joke, no matter how harmless it might seem to the person telling it, could have lasting impact far beyond the laughter of a studio audience. For Vanessa Williams, the experience was painful but also educational. It underscored the complexities of fame and identity, and the extra scrutiny that comes with being a trailblazer. For Johnny Carson, it was a reminder that the stage he ruled was changing, and that jokes that might have landed easily in earlier decades could now hit very sensitive nerves. The incident marked a turning point in how late-night television approached sensitive topics, particularly those involving race and social progress. It showed that audiences were becoming more aware of the power of media representation and less willing to accept casual insensitivity, even when it was wrapped in humor. After decades of conflicts, confrontations, and complicated relationships, Johnny Carson's career wound down with a final chapter that included one last on-air argument. It was a fitting end for a man who had never been afraid to speak his mind, even when it meant making enemies. Carson's retirement in 1992 was a landmark moment for television. For 30 years, he had been the undisputed king of late night, the man who had shaped an entire genre of entertainment. His farewell episode was watched by millions of people who wanted to say goodbye to a true television legend. During that final show, Carson invited several former guests, friends, and colleagues to help celebrate his incredible career. The evening was meant to be a nostalgic look back at 3 decades of unforgettable moments. But as the night unfolded, what started as warm reminiscing quickly turned into something more heated. A younger comedian, someone who represented the new generation of late-night hosts, made a comment suggesting that Carson's style of humor was becoming outdated. The comedian implied that the new hosts coming up were bringing fresh perspectives and necessary changes to late-night television. Carson, who had spent his entire career defending the standards and professionalism of The Tonight Show, didn't take kindly to the suggestion that his era was over. What could have been a polite disagreement quickly escalated into a sharp debate, with Carson pushing back hard against the idea that his legacy was somehow outdated or irrelevant. For many viewers, it was startling to see Carson get so defensive on his final night. But it was also a reminder of why he had been so successful for so long. Carson had never been willing to compromise on quality, professionalism, or authenticity. Even on his last night, he wasn't about to let someone dismiss the foundation he had built. The argument wasn't ugly or mean-spirited, but it was charged with the passion of a man who was fiercely protective of his life's work. Carson insisted that while the faces and styles of late-night television might change, the basic principles of good hosting and quality entertainment would endure. In the final moments of the show, Carson's tone softened. He acknowledged that change was inevitable and that new hosts would bring their own perspectives to late-night television. But he also made it clear that he believed the standards he had set would continue to influence the genre for years to come. The farewell ended with applause, laughter, and genuine emotion. But that final argument lingered as a testament to Johnny Carson's complexity. Even in his last moments on television, he was still fighting for what he believed in, still refusing to back down from a challenge, still determined to have the last word. As Carson turned off the lights on The Tonight Show for the final time, he left behind a legacy that was about much more than just jokes and celebrity interviews. He had shown that late-night television could be smart, sophisticated, and influential. He had proven that a host could be both entertaining and authoritative, both funny and serious. But perhaps most importantly, he had demonstrated that even in the world of entertainment, principles mattered. Carson's willingness to fight for his beliefs, even when it made him enemies, even when it cost him friendships, even when it caused controversy, was part of what made him such a compelling figure. Johnny Carson wasn't just a late-night host. He was a complex, passionate, and deeply human figure who happened to have one of the biggest platforms in American media. His arguments and feuds weren't just celebrity gossip. They were windows into the character of a man who refused to compromise his standards, even when the cost was high. From his heartbreaking feud with Joan Rivers to his dramatic confrontations with Wayne Newton, from his painful family struggles to his battles with the press, Carson's conflicts revealed a man behind the famous smile. They showed us someone who was capable of great loyalty and terrible grudges, someone who could be both generous and petty, someone who was brilliantly funny but also deeply flawed. These intense moments remind us that even comedy's greatest figures are human beings with real emotions, real relationships, and real consequences for their actions. Carson's legacy isn't just about the laughter he brought to millions of people. It's also about the complex drama that unfolded behind the scenes, the relationships that were built and broken, and the very human struggles that played out on one of television's biggest stages. The arguments and feuds that define Johnny Carson's career teach us that success and conflict often go hand in hand. They show us that having principles sometimes means making enemies. And they remind us that the most interesting stories often happen when the cameras stop rolling and the real personalities emerge. Johnny Carson ruled late-night television for 3 decades, but his true legacy lies in the full spectrum of his humanity. The laughter, the tears, the friendships, the feuds, the triumphs, and the tragedies all combine to create one of the most fascinating figures in entertainment history. If this deep dive into Johnny Carson's most intense arguments has opened your eyes to the complex reality behind late-night television's greatest icon, then please show your support by hitting that like button. These stories of conflict, betrayal, and human drama deserve to be remembered and understood. Share this video with anyone who loves television history or wants to understand the real story behind the famous smile. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories about the hidden dramas and untold conflicts that shape the entertainment world we know today. There's so much more to discover about the people who made television history, and we're just getting started.